The iron gates of Riverside Women's Correctional Facility groaned open on New Year's Day, releasing a cloud of frozen breath into the bitter January morning. Dorothy Miller, 73 years old, stepped through those gates for the first time in 35 years. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of freedom she'd stopped believing would ever come. Behind her, the fortress of concrete and razor wire that had been her entire world since 1990 stood silent, indifferent to her departure. The guards who'd watched her age from a woman of 38 to this frail, white-haired stranger offered no farewell. To them, she was simply another file being closed, another number disappearing from their ledgers. Dorothy clutched a thin plastic bag containing everything she owned. A few photographs yellowed with time, letters from a daughter who'd eventually stopped writing, and $47 in release money. She wore donated clothes that hung loose on her diminished frame, a cheap winter coat, 2 sizes too large, pants that needed a belt she didn't have, and shoes that pinched her feet with every step. The world beyond those gates looked nothing like the one she remembered. The cars seemed impossibly sleek, the buildings taller, and everywhere she looked, people stared at glowing rectangles in their hands, completely absorbed in worlds she couldn't see. If you're finding this story compelling, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most powerful real-life stories of redemption, hope, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because stories like Dorothy's deserve to be heard, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Trust me when I say this journey is just beginning, and where it leads will leave you speechless. This story is presented as a narrative reconstruction. The social worker assigned to Dorothy's case, a young woman named Jennifer Martinez, stood by an idling sedan, her expression carefully neutral. Jennifer had seen dozens of releases, watched countless elderly inmates shuffle out into a world that had forgotten them. Most ended up back in halfway houses within weeks, unable to navigate a society that had transformed beyond recognition during their incarceration. Dorothy, she'd noted in her file, had particular challenges ahead. No family waiting, no job prospects for a 73-year-old convicted felon, and perhaps most devastating of all, no home to return to. The modest house she'd shared with her daughter had been sold to pay legal fees decades ago. "Mrs. Miller," Jennifer said, forcing warmth into her voice despite the cold. "Ready to go?" Dorothy nodded, unable to speak. Ready? How could anyone be ready for this? She'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 10,000 times over the years, imagined the taste of freedom, the feeling of air untainted by the smell of industrial cleaner and desperation. But now that it had arrived, she felt only terror. The prison had been hell, but it had also been predictable. Every day the same, every moment structured. Now she faced an abyss of possibility, and the weight of it threatened to crush her. The drive from the prison took 45 minutes, though to Dorothy it felt like traveling through a fever dream. Jennifer tried to make conversation, explaining about the halfway house where Dorothy would be staying, about the parole requirements and check-ins, about job training programs for ex-offenders. But Dorothy barely heard her. She pressed her face against the window like a child, watching the world stream past. There were coffee shops she'd never heard of on every corner. The gas stations looked like spaceships, and the people, so many people, all moving with purpose and urgency that seemed almost violent in its intensity. "You'll need to get a cell phone," Jennifer was saying. "Everything's done through apps now. Job applications, appointments, even buying food. The halfway house has a computer lab where you can learn—" "I don't understand," Dorothy whispered. "Any of it." Jennifer glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, genuine sympathy cracked through her professional facade. "I know, but you'll learn. Everyone does. Eventually." But would she? Dorothy had entered prison in a world of payphones and handwritten letters, a world where computers were mysterious machines that only businesses used. She'd missed the entire evolution of the internet, of smartphones, of social media. She'd missed watching her daughter grow from a frightened 12-year-old girl to whatever she'd become. She'd missed birthdays and graduations, holidays and ordinary Tuesdays. She'd missed entire decades of life, and now she was expected to simply catch up, to pretend that gap could somehow be bridged. The car turned onto a familiar street, and Dorothy's breath caught. "Wait," she said. This is my neighborhood." "Was your neighborhood," Jennifer corrected gently. "The halfway house is actually just 2 blocks from where you used to live. I thought you knew." Dorothy hadn't known, hadn't wanted to know. The thought of being so close to her old life, yet eternally separated from it, felt like a particular form of torture. As they drove slowly down streets she'd once known intimately, she catalogued the changes. The corner store where she'd bought milk and bread was now a vape shop. The elementary school her daughter had attended was now a condominium complex. The oak tree she'd planted in their front yard the year her daughter was born, she craned her neck, searching for it, but couldn't be sure which house had been hers. They all looked different, renovated and updated, transformed into homes for people living lives she couldn't fathom. The halfway house was a converted Victorian that had seen better days. Paint peeled from the shutters, and the front porch sagged slightly to one side. A sign reading, "New Beginnings Transition House," hung crookedly by the door. Jennifer helped Dorothy with her meager belongings, a task that took all of 30 seconds, and guided her inside. The interior smelled of old coffee and pine sol. A television in the common room blared news about political scandals and celebrity gossip that meant nothing to Dorothy. 3 other residents sat scattered around the room. All women, all bearing the same haunted expression of people learning to live in a world that had moved on without them. "Dorothy Miller, this is Shirley Jackson," Jennifer said, introducing Dorothy to the house manager, a heavy-set woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Shirley's going to get you oriented, show you your room, explain the house rules." "Be mon." Shirley smiled, but it was a sad smile, the smile of someone who'd seen too many broken people pass through these doors. "Welcome, Dorothy. You'll be sharing a room with Ethel. She's been here 6 months, got out after doing 22 years for embezzlement. She's good people, quiet, keeps to herself mostly." A shared room. Dorothy hadn't had privacy in 35 years, and she wouldn't have it now. She nodded, swallowing her disappointment. What had she expected? A palace? Jennifer completed her paperwork, reviewed Dorothy's parole conditions one final time, and prepared to leave. "I'll check in next week," she said. "You have my number if you need anything. And Dorothy?" She paused at the door. "I've read your file. I know what you were convicted of, and I know you've maintained your innocence. I can't change what happened, but I can tell you this. You served your time. All of it. What matters now is what you do with whatever time you have left." After Jennifer left, Shirley showed Dorothy to her room, a cramped space with 2 twin beds, 2 small dressers, and a single window overlooking an alley. Ethel, her roommate, wasn't there. Dorothy sat on the bed that would be hers and tried not to cry. This was freedom. This was the life she'd dreamed about through 13,000 nights of captivity. A shared room in a halfway house, with nothing to her name but $47 and the clothes on her back. That night, Dorothy lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, of cars passing on the street outside, of Ethel's gentle snoring from the other bed. Freedom, she was discovering, was louder than prison. In prison, there'd been order, routine, the strange comfort of knowing exactly what each day would bring. Here, everything was uncertain. Tomorrow she'd have to start looking for work, though who would hire a 73-year-old woman with a murder conviction? She'd have to learn to use a cell phone, navigate buses without exact change, understand this new world of apps and passwords and digital everything. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling back to the one thought she'd been trying to suppress since the moment she'd walked through those prison gates. Her daughter, Emily. The last time Dorothy had seen her, Emily had been 12 years old, sobbing in the courtroom as the judge read the sentence. 35 years to life for the murder of Emily's father, Dorothy's husband. A murder Dorothy swore she didn't commit, though the evidence had told a different story. Blood on her clothes, her fingerprints on the knife. No forced entry, no signs of struggle except the fatal wounds. The prosecutor had painted her as a cold-blooded killer who'd waited until her daughter was asleep before stabbing her husband 17 times. But Dorothy remembered it differently. She remembered coming home late from her night shift at the diner, finding Thomas already dead, the knife in her hand before she'd even realized she'd picked it up. She remembered screaming, remembered Emily's terrified face appearing in the doorway. She remembered the police, the handcuffs, the trial that had seemed like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. And she remembered Emily's final words to her, spoken in a voice raw from crying. "I hate you. I'll hate you forever." 35 years. Emily would be 47 now, older than Dorothy had been when she'd entered prison. Did she still hate her mother? Did she ever think about her? Dorothy had written letters for the first 10 years, dozens of them, hundreds, but Emily had never responded. Eventually, Dorothy had stopped trying. What was the point? Her daughter had built a life without her, and who could blame her? Whether Dorothy was guilty or innocent, whether justice had been served or miscarried, the result was the same. She'd lost her daughter, lost her entire life, lost everything that had ever mattered. The next morning, Shirley knocked on Dorothy's door at 6 a.m. "Time to get up. Breakfast is at 7, and then you've got orientation. New resident protocol. You need to learn the bus routes, get registered at the employment office, all that fun stuff." Dorothy dressed in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday, her only clothes, and made her way downstairs. The common room was already full, women of various ages eating cold cereal and toast, watching morning news shows that Dorothy couldn't follow. The president was someone she'd never heard of. There was talk of wars in countries she couldn't place on a map. Celebrity names that meant nothing. It was like watching television from another planet. After breakfast, Shirley handed Dorothy a bus pass and a printed schedule. "The employment office is downtown. Take the number 7 bus. Transfer to the 12. Someone from their ex-offender program will meet with you, help you fill out applications. Can't promise much. Most places aren't eager to hire someone your age with your record, but they'll try." The bus journey was overwhelming. Dorothy sat gripping her seat as the vehicle lurched through traffic, surrounded by passengers absorbed in their phones. Nobody talked. Nobody made eye contact. Everyone seemed to exist in their own isolated bubble, connected to unseen networks, but disconnected from the physical world around them. When Dorothy's stop came, she almost missed it, confused by the automated announcement system. The employment office was a fluorescent-lit purgatory of plastic chairs and tired government workers processing an endless stream of the displaced and desperate. Dorothy waited 3 hours before her name was called. The counselor assigned to her case, a middle-aged man named Robert Chen, tried to be encouraging, but Dorothy could see the truth behind his professional optimism. Her age was a problem. Her conviction was a bigger problem. And her complete lack of work experience in anything resembling a modern workplace was the biggest problem of all. "Can you use a computer?" Robert asked. "No." "Do you have any certifications?" "Technical skills?" "I worked in a diner 35 years ago." Robert sighed, tapping at his keyboard. "Okay. Well, there are some positions available. Janitorial work mostly. Night shifts, minimum wage. Would you be interested in that?" Dorothy wanted to laugh. Interested? At 73, with arthritis in her knees and hands that shook from decades of prison stress. But she nodded. "Yes, anything. I'll submit your applications. It might take a few weeks to hear back. In the meantime, I'd recommend taking the free computer classes at the public library. And Mrs. Miller?" He looked up from his screen, his expression softening slightly. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen people like you come through here, people who got out after decades inside. Some make it, some don't. The ones who make it are the ones who find a reason to keep going, something to care about. So my advice? Find that reason, whatever it is. Matthew. Dorothy left the employment office as the afternoon sun was already beginning its descent toward winter darkness. She'd been free for less than 24 hours, and already she felt exhausted in a way that 35 years of prison had never achieved. This was the crushing fatigue of hopelessness, of understanding that freedom wasn't a gift but a burden, a weight of responsibility she wasn't sure she could carry. She found herself walking instead of taking the bus back to the halfway house. Her feet hurt, and the cold bit through her inadequate coat, but she needed to move, to feel something real. The streets of her old neighborhood looked both familiar and alien, like a place half remembered from a dream. And then, almost without meaning to, she found herself standing in front of a house she recognized despite all the changes. The oak tree was there, massive now, its bare winter branches reaching toward the gray sky. This was her house. The house where she'd raised Emily, where she'd found Thomas dead, where her life had ended even though her body had continued breathing for another 3.5 decades. A car was parked in the driveway, lights on inside the house. Someone lived there now, some family with no connection to the tragedy that had unfolded within those walls. Dorothy stood on the sidewalk, staring, unable to move. What was she doing here? What did she hope to find? And then the front door opened, and a woman emerged. She was in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater. She walked toward the mailbox, and as she did, her eyes met Dorothy's. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the dying afternoon light. The woman's expression changed from curiosity to something else. Recognition? Concern? She took a step toward the sidewalk. "Can I help you?" Dorothy opened her mouth to respond, to apologize for lurking outside a stranger's house, to explain that she used to live here, that she'd lost everything here. But before she could speak, a child's voice called from inside the house. "Mom, I can't find my shoes." The woman glanced back toward the door. "Just a second, sweetie," she turned back to Dorothy. "Are you looking for someone?" "No," Dorothy managed. "I'm sorry. I used to, a long time ago, She couldn't finish. What could she possibly say? The woman's expression softened with understanding. "You used to live here," Dorothy nodded. "Would you like to come in? See what we've done with the place?" The offer hung in the cold air between them. Dorothy knew she should decline, should simply walk away and let this stranger return to her warm house and her normal life. But something in the woman's kind eyes made her hesitate. And in that hesitation, she heard herself say, "Yes, if it's not too much trouble." The woman smiled. "No trouble at all. I'm Sarah, by the way. Dorothy." They walked together up the path Dorothy had walked 1,000 times before, toward the door she'd last passed through in handcuffs, surrounded by police. Sarah opened the door, and Dorothy stepped inside, and that's when she froze. That's when her heart stopped. That's when the world tilted sideways, and everything she thought she knew shattered into 1,000 pieces. Because there, sitting in the living room, looking up at her with eyes full of tears and recognition and something that might have been forgiveness, was Emily. Her daughter. After 35 years. Right there, in the house where it all began. And Dorothy realized with stunning clarity that this wasn't coincidence. This was something else entirely. Dorothy's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Sarah hadn't caught her arm, guiding her to the nearest chair. But Dorothy couldn't take her eyes off the woman sitting across the room. The woman who had her mother's eyes, her father's chin, and 35 years of life etched into features that Dorothy had last seen smooth with youth. Emily didn't move. She sat frozen on the sofa, her hands gripping a coffee mug so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The silence stretched between them like a chasm too wide to cross, filled with all the words that had gone unspoken for more than 3 decades. "I'll give you two some privacy," Sarah said quietly, and disappeared into another room, taking the child with her. The little girl's voice drifted back. "Who's that lady, Mommy?" But the response was too soft for Dorothy to hear. Then there was only the sound of Dorothy's ragged breathing and the tick of a clock somewhere in the house. A different clock than the one that had hung in this room when this had been Dorothy's home. But the sound was the same. Time passing. Time that could never be recovered. "How?" Dorothy finally whispered. "How are you here?" Emily set down the coffee mug with trembling hands. When she spoke, her voice was rougher than Dorothy remembered, worn down by years of cigarettes or shouting or crying, or maybe all three. "This has been my house for 2 years. I bought it back. Took me 15 years to save enough, but I bought it back." She paused, swallowing hard. "I wanted my daughter to grow up in the same house I did. Before everything happened, I thought maybe I could, I don't know, rewrite the story somehow. Your daughter." Dorothy felt the words hit her like a physical blow. She was a grandmother. Had been a grandmother, apparently, without knowing it. How old was the child? 5? 6? Emily had built an entire life, had become a mother herself, and Dorothy had missed all of it. "Emily, don't!" Emily held up a hand, her expression hardening. "Don't say my name like that. Don't act like you have the right to just walk back in here after all these years and expect—" "What? Forgiveness? Reconciliation? A happy ending?" "I don't expect anything," Dorothy said, and it was true. She'd given up on expectations the day the jury had read their verdict. I was walking. I didn't know you lived here. I swear to you, I didn't know. But you came to this house anyway. It wasn't a question." Emily's eyes were hard now, defensive. "First day out of prison, and you came straight here. To the place where you murdered my father." "I didn't murder him." The words came out automatically, as they had 10,000 times before, to lawyers, to judges, to parole boards, to herself in the darkness of her cell. "Emily, I know you don't believe me. I know the evidence said otherwise. But I swear on everything I am, I didn't kill Thomas. I loved him. He was my husband, the father of my child. I would never—" "Stop." Emily stood up abruptly, crossing to the window, putting distance between them. "I've heard this before. In the letters you sent, the ones I burned without reading after the first few, you always said the same thing. I didn't do it. I'm innocent. Someone else was there. But there was no one else, Mom. It was just you and him and me sleeping upstairs. And when I woke up, he was dead, and you were covered in his blood." The memory hit Dorothy like it always did, vivid and terrible. Thomas on the kitchen floor, his eyes open and empty. Blood everywhere, on the linoleum, on the walls, on her hands and clothes. The knife. She'd picked up the knife. Why had she picked up the knife? She'd never understood that, never been able to explain it even to herself. Some instinct had made her reach for it, pull it from his chest, and in doing so, seal her own fate. "I came home from work and found him like that," Dorothy said, knowing even as she spoke that it sounded like a lie. It had sounded like a lie in court, too. "My shift ended at 11. I walked in the back door at 11:15. He was already dead, already cold. Emily, I picked up the knife because I was in shock. I didn't know what I was doing, and then I heard you scream, and I looked up and you were there, and I realized how it must look, but I swear to you, the police said there was no sign of forced entry." Emily's voice was flat, reciting facts she'd obviously memorized. "No evidence of anyone else being in the house. Your fingerprints were the only ones on the knife. You had a cut on your hand. You said you got it when you picked up the knife, but the prosecution said it was a defensive wound from when Dad fought back. The neighbors testified they'd heard you and Dad arguing that morning before you left for work. About money, about how he wanted you to quit your job, and you refused." "We did argue," Dorothy admitted. "We argued a lot in those last few months. Thomas had lost his job, and money was tight, and we were both stressed. But we didn't argue about anything worth killing over. It was just normal marriage friction, the kind everyone has. Normal marriages don't end with one partner stabbed 17 times. The number still made Dorothy flinch. 17 times. That's what the prosecutor had emphasized. This wasn't a crime of passion, a single blow struck in anger. This was overkill, rage, someone who'd wanted Thomas dead and had made absolutely sure of it. The jury had looked at sweet-faced Dorothy Miller, housewife and diner waitress, and decided she was capable of that kind of violence. And maybe they'd been right. Maybe Dorothy had killed her husband in some dissociative state she couldn't remember. Maybe she was guilty, and her brain had simply protected her from the memory of what she'd done. But she didn't believe that. Couldn't believe it. Because if she was guilty, then the last 35 years had been punishment she deserved, and her suffering had meaning. If she was innocent, then she'd been robbed of her life, her daughter, everything, and that truth was almost worse than guilt. "Why did you come back here?" Emily asked again, turning from the window to face her mother. In the afternoon light, Dorothy could see the lines around her daughter's eyes, the gray threading through her dark hair. Emily looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. She looked like someone who'd been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time. "You get released from prison, and the first thing you do is come to this house? What were you hoping to find?" "I don't know," Dorothy said honestly. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I was walking, and my feet just brought me here. This was the last place I felt human. The last place I was a mother, a wife, a person with a normal life. Everything that came after was just survival. Existing, waiting to die. Coming here was stupid. I should go." She started to stand, but Emily's voice stopped her. "Wait!" Dorothy froze, half risen from the chair. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of self-protection Dorothy recognized from when Emily had been a little girl, afraid of thunderstorms or bad dreams. "I need to tell you something. Something I couldn't say in a letter, couldn't bring myself to write down. But if you're here, if you're actually standing in front of me after all this time, then maybe I need to say it. Maybe we both need to hear it." Dorothy sat back down slowly, her heart hammering. "Okay. I lied." The words came out in a rush, as if Emily had been holding them in for so long they could no longer be contained. "At your trial, I lied." The room seemed to tilt. Dorothy gripped the arms of her chair. "What?" "When they asked me if I heard anything that night, any sounds before I came downstairs and found you with Dad's body, I said no. I said I was asleep, didn't hear anything unusual. But that wasn't true." Tears were streaming down Emily's face now, though her voice remained steady. "I did hear something. I heard voices. I heard Dad and someone else. Someone who wasn't you." Dorothy couldn't breathe. 35 years. 35 years she'd been in prison. And now Emily was telling her this? "Why?" she managed to choke out. "Why would you lie?" "Because I was 12 years old, and I was terrified." Emily's composure cracked, her voice rising. "The police kept asking me questions over and over. They kept telling me I needed to remember clearly, that I needed to be sure. And I was sure. I heard voices. But then they found you with the knife, with Dad's blood all over you, and everyone kept saying there was no one else. The evidence proved there was no one else. My lawyer, the one assigned to me because I was a minor witness, he told me I was probably confused, probably dreaming that trauma can make you misremember things. And I started to doubt what I'd heard. And then when I saw you in that courtroom, saw you looking so calm and distant, like you didn't even care that Dad was dead, I got angry. I thought maybe everyone was right, and I was wrong, so when they asked me on the witness stand, I said I didn't hear anything." Dorothy felt like she was falling, tumbling through space with nothing to grab onto. "There was someone else in the house that night." "I think so." "Yes. I've thought so for 35 years, and it's eaten me alive. Emily collapsed back onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. Do you have any idea what it's like, knowing you might have sent your mother to prison for something she didn't do? Knowing you were too scared and confused to tell the truth when it mattered? I was a child, and I made a choice that destroyed both of our lives. Emily. Dorothy crossed the room without thinking, sitting beside her daughter for the first time in 3.5 decades. She wanted to touch her, to hold her, but didn't dare. You were 12. You were traumatized. None of this is your fault, isn't it? Emily looked up, her face blotchy with tears. I could have told the truth. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. Maybe they still would have convicted you, but at least I would have tried. At least I would have given you a chance. Instead, I stayed silent, and then I convinced myself you were guilty because it was easier than living with what I'd done. I told myself you deserved to be in prison. I burned your letters because reading them would mean facing the truth. And I hate myself for it. I have hated myself every single day for 35 years. Dorothy did touch her then, placing a wrinkled, trembling hand over her daughter's younger, steadier one. I forgive you. You shouldn't. Emily pulled her hand away. You should hate me. I helped put you in prison. I helped steal your life. You were a child protecting herself the only way you knew how. And Emily, Dorothy waited until her daughter looked at her. Even if you had testified about the voices, they might not have believed you. The physical evidence was overwhelming. My prints on the knife, his blood on my clothes. No sign of forced entry or struggle beyond the stab wounds. A jury might have dismissed your testimony as the confused memories of a traumatized child. The prosecutor would have torn you apart on cross-examination. You were 12 years old. You shouldn't have had to carry the weight of my defense. But I did carry it, and I failed. And you paid the price. Emily wiped at her tears roughly. Do you remember what I said to you? The last time we saw each other at the sentencing? You said you hated me. I was 12 and angry and scared, and I blamed you for everything, but I didn't mean it. Not really. Or maybe I did mean it then. But I stopped meaning it years ago. I started trying to find you about 5 years ago, to reach out, to tell you the truth. But every time I picked up the phone or started a letter, I froze. What was I supposed to say? Sorry I helped send you to prison for 35 years. How do you apologize for something like that? You don't have to apologize, Dorothy's voice cracked. Emily, you don't owe me anything. The fact that you're even willing to sit in the same room as me to tell me this, that's more than I ever hoped for. They sat in silence for a moment, two women separated by decades and trauma, but connected by blood and shared grief. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice softer now. I hired a private investigator 3 years ago. After I bought back this house, after I had Lily, that's my daughter, your granddaughter, I started thinking about family legacy, about what I was passing down to her, and I realized I couldn't let her grow up not knowing the truth about her grandmother. So I hired someone to look into Dad's murder, to see if there was anything the police missed. Dorothy's heart began to race. Did he find something? Maybe. He found something strange anyway. Emily stood, crossing to a desk in the corner of the room. She pulled out a file folder, thick with papers. The official investigation concluded there was no one else in the house that night. But my investigator started looking into Dad's finances from that time, and he found something the police either missed or didn't think was important. In the 6 months before he died, Dad made 3 large cash withdrawals. $2,000 each time. $6,000 a total. We were broke. You were working double shifts to keep us afloat. So where did he get $6,000 to withdraw? And more importantly, where did it go? Dorothy felt her mind spinning, trying to process this information. I didn't know about any withdrawals. I handled most of our finances because Thomas he wasn't good with money. He'd spend it if he had it. But I didn't know about any savings account with $6,000 in it. There wasn't a savings account. These withdrawals came from a credit card. He took out cash advances, which means he was paying huge interest fees. He was going deeper into debt, and you didn't know about it. Emily handed Dorothy the file. The investigator thinks Dad might have been paying someone. Blackmail, maybe. Or gambling debts. Something he was trying to keep secret from you. Dorothy opened the file with shaking hands, looking at bank statements and credit card records she'd never seen before. The withdrawals were there, clear as day. $2,000 on March 15th. $2,000 on April 22nd. $2,000 on June 3rd. Thomas had died on June 18th. 2 weeks after the last withdrawal. If he owed someone money, Emily continued, and if he couldn't pay anymore, they might have come to collect. Dorothy finished the thought, her mind racing. They might have come to the house that night, while I was at work, and when he couldn't pay, they killed him. It's a theory. We don't have proof, but it makes sense, doesn't it? More sense than you suddenly snapping and stabbing him 17 times for no reason. Emily took the file back, closing it carefully. The investigator tried to trace where the money went, but it was all cash withdrawals. No paper trail. He talked to some of Dad's old friends, people he used to hang out with at the bar. A few of them mentioned that Dad had been acting strange in those last months. Nervous, looking over his shoulder. One guy said Dad asked him about borrowing money, said he was in trouble but wouldn't explain what kind. Dorothy felt something stirring inside her, something she hadn't felt in 35 years. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling, fragile as spun glass. Why didn't this come out at the trial? Because no one was looking for it. The police had you dead to rights, pardon the expression. They had a suspect, evidence, and a clear narrative. Wife and husband fight about money. Wife snaps. Wife kills husband. Case closed. They didn't need to dig deeper into Dad's finances or his personal life. They already had their killer. Emily's expression hardened. And I didn't tell them about the voices I heard, so there was no reason for them to think anyone else was involved. It's not your fault, Dorothy said again, but she could see the words weren't landing. Emily had been carrying this guilt for too long, and it had become part of her, woven into her identity. Forgiveness wasn't something that could be given in a single conversation. It would take time, and maybe it would never fully come. Maybe they would both carry their scars forever. Sarah appeared in the doorway, hesitant. I don't mean to interrupt, but Lily's asking questions, and I'm not sure what to tell her. Should I? Bring her in, Emily said. She looked at Dorothy. If that's okay with you, if you want to meet her. Did she want to meet her granddaughter? The question seemed absurd. Of course she wanted to meet her. But at the same time, the thought terrified her. What would she say to this child? How would Emily explain who Dorothy was? Here's your grandmother, who went to prison for murder. Here's your grandmother, who missed your entire life because she might or might not have killed your grandfather. But before Dorothy could answer, a little girl appeared in the doorway, partially hidden behind Sarah's legs. She was small for what Dorothy guessed was 6 years old, with dark curly hair and enormous brown eyes that studied Dorothy with frank curiosity. She wore purple leggings and a shirt with a cartoon character Dorothy didn't recognize. In her arms, she clutched a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Lily, this is... Emily hesitated, and Dorothy could see her struggling with how to explain this. This is my mom, your grandmother. She's been away for a long time. But now she's back. Where were you? Lily asked with the directness of children who haven't yet learned that some questions are rude. Dorothy opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? I was in prison? I was serving a life sentence for murdering your grandfather? The truth was impossible. But lying felt wrong too. Emily rescued her. Grandma Dorothy lived far away and we couldn't visit her, but now she's back and we're very happy about it. Lily considered this, her small face scrunched in thought. Then she took a step forward, pulling away from Sarah's protective grasp. You're really old. Despite everything, the trauma, the tears, The terrible weight of the last hour. Dorothy felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. Yes, I am really old. How old? 73. Lily's eyes widened. That's older than anyone I know. Are you gonna die soon? Lily! Emily's voice was sharp with embarrassment, but Dorothy just smiled, the expression feeling strange on her face after so many years of having nothing to smile about. Probably not today. But yes, someday. We all die someday. My rabbit almost died once, Lily said, holding up the stuffed animal. His arm came off and Mommy had to do surgery. She used a needle and thread and everything. Now he has a scar, but he's okay. He's very lucky to have a mom who's good at surgery, Dorothy said softly. Lily nodded seriously. Then, without warning, she crossed the room and climbed onto the sofa next to Dorothy. Up close, Dorothy could see Emily in her features, the shape of her nose, the way her eyebrows arched. But there was something else too, something that might have been Thomas. The thought should have hurt, but instead it felt right. This child was a continuation, a piece of the family that had been destroyed but somehow survived. Do you want to see my room? Lily asked. I have a dollhouse. It's really big. Dorothy looked at Emily, seeking permission. Her daughter nodded, though her expression was complex. Hope mixed with fear, mixed with something that might have been the beginning of healing. I would love to see your room, Dorothy said. Lily grabbed her hand, small, soft fingers wrapping around Dorothy's gnarled, aged ones, and pulled her toward the stairs. As they climbed, Dorothy felt dizzy with déjà vu. She'd climbed these stairs countless times when this had been her home. Emily's room had been at the top on the right. Dorothy's bedroom, hers and Thomas's, had been on the left. She wondered which room was Lily's now. Whether Emily had claimed her childhood room, or if she'd taken the master bedroom, the room where Dorothy had slept beside a man who might have been keeping terrible secrets. Lily's room was the one on the right, Emily's old room. It had been repainted pink and was filled with toys and books and the cheerful chaos of a child's space. The dollhouse dominated one corner, a massive Victorian structure that must have cost a fortune. Lily immediately began showing Dorothy each room, explaining the intricate details of which doll lived where and what their stories were. Dorothy listened, making appropriate sounds of interest, but part of her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Thomas, about the man she'd been married to for 13 years and apparently hadn't known at all. Who had he been paying? And why? The questions multiplied in her head, each one sprouting 10 more. Had there been signs she'd missed? Had Thomas been in danger and she'd been too caught up in work and exhaustion to notice? Emily appeared in the doorway, watching them. For a moment, the 3 generations of women simply existed in the same space, connected by blood and tragedy and the fragile possibility of redemption. Then Emily spoke, her voice soft but clear. Dorothy, I want to help you. I want to prove you're innocent. The investigator I hired is still working on it, but it's slow going. The trail is 35 years old. But if there's any chance, Emily, you don't have to do this. You have your own life. Your daughter. You can't put everything on hold to... I'm not putting anything on hold. This is my life. Don't you understand? This has always been my life. Every choice I've made, every relationship I've had, everything, it's all been shaped by that night, by what I saw and what I didn't say, by the guilt and the doubt and the not knowing. I need to know the truth, not just for you, but for me and for Lily. I don't want her to grow up in a house haunted by secrets. Dorothy felt tears stinging her eyes again. She was so tired of crying. She'd cried enough in prison for several lifetimes. But these were different tears. Not tears of despair, but of something else. Something that might have been hope. Grandma Dorothy? Lily tugged on her sleeve. Are you sad? No, sweetheart. I'm not sad. I'm very happy to meet you. Will you come back and visit me? The question hung in the air. Would she? Could she? What was the protocol for reconnecting with a family you'd been ripped away from 3.5 decades ago? Emily hadn't exactly invited her to become a regular presence in their lives, and the halfway house had rules, curfews, check-ins, restrictions on where she could go and who she could see. But before Dorothy could answer, Emily did. Yes, she'll come back, if she wants to. I want to, Dorothy said, more than anything. As the afternoon faded into evening, Sarah, who turned out to be Emily's wife, a detail Dorothy absorbed with some surprise and immediate acceptance, made dinner. They all sat around the table in the dining room, eating spaghetti and garlic bread, while Lily chattered about school and her friends and a field trip to the zoo she was excited about. It was so painfully normal, so far removed from the institutional meals Dorothy had eaten for 35 years, that she found herself fighting back tears again. When it was time to leave, Emily walked Dorothy to the door. They stood in the entryway, neither quite sure how to say goodbye. Finally, Emily reached out and pulled Dorothy into a hug, brief, awkward, but real. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. We'll figure out next steps. The investigator's name is Marcus Webb. I'll see if he can meet with you. Go over everything he's found. Thank you, Dorothy whispered. For today, for telling me the truth, for letting me meet Lily, for everything. Don't thank me yet. We haven't proven anything. And even if we find evidence that someone else was there that night, it might not be enough to overturn your conviction. The legal system doesn't like admitting it made mistakes. I know, but at least we'll try. That's more than I've had in a very long time. The walk back to the halfway house took Dorothy through streets now dark with night. The temperature had dropped, and she pulled her thin coat tighter against the cold. But she barely felt the chill. Her mind was too full, spinning with everything that had happened. She'd been free for 36 hours, and in that time, her entire world had shifted. She had a daughter again, a granddaughter, a family, and possibly, impossibly, a chance at clearing her name. But she also had questions. So many questions. Who had Thomas been paying? Why? And had that person killed him? If so, they'd been free for 35 years while Dorothy had rotted in prison. The injustice of it made her stomach twist with anger. But anger was good. Anger was better than the numb acceptance she'd lived with for decades. When she reached the halfway house, Shirley was in the common room watching television. She looked up as Dorothy entered. You're out late. I was starting to worry. How'd it go at the employment office? Dorothy had completely forgotten about the employment office. That felt like it had happened weeks ago. Not this morning. Fine, she said. They're going to help me find something. Shirley studied her face, and Dorothy wondered what she saw there. You look different than you did this morning. Something happened. I found my daughter. The words came out before Dorothy could stop them. I found my daughter, and she doesn't hate me, and she has a little girl, and everything is complicated, but maybe it's going to be okay. Shirley smiled, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Well, congratulations. That's more than most of the women who come through here get. Hold on to that. You're going to need it. Dorothy went upstairs to the room she shared with Ethel, who was already asleep. She lay in the dark, exhausted but unable to sleep, replaying the day in her mind. Tomorrow she would have to deal with practical matters, job applications, parole check-ins, learning how to navigate a world she didn't understand. But tonight, she let herself feel something she hadn't felt in 35 years. Hope. Fragile and terrifying, but real. And maybe, just maybe, a chance at redemption. Not just for herself, but for Emily too. For both of them. For all of them. Outside, snow began to fall. The first snow of the new year. Dorothy watched it through the window. White flakes drifting down through the darkness, covering the world in clean, blank whiteness. A fresh start. A new beginning. She would take it. Marcus Webb's office was located above a Korean barbecue restaurant in a part of downtown that gentrification hadn't quite reached yet. Dorothy climbed the narrow stairs slowly, her knees protesting each step, following Emily, who moved with the confidence of someone who'd made this journey before. The building smelled of grilled meat and kimchi, scents that would have made Dorothy's stomach growl if she weren't so nervous. It had been 3 days since that first encounter at Emily's house. 3 days of phone calls and arrangements, and Dorothy trying to wrap her mind around the fact that her life might actually be changing. The door at the top of the stairs had frosted glass with Webb Investigations stenciled in peeling gold letters. Emily knocked twice and entered without waiting for a response. The office inside was exactly what Dorothy had expected from watching old detective movies in prison. Cluttered desk, filing cabinets overflowing with manila folders, a dying plant in the corner that someone kept forgetting to water. But Marcus Webb himself was nothing like the grizzled private eyes from those films. He was younger than Dorothy had anticipated, maybe 45, with dark skin, close-cropped hair going gray at the temples, and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and when he stood to greet them, his handshake was firm but gentle. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Emily's told me a lot about your case. Please, call me Dorothy." She took the seat he offered, a worn leather chair that had probably been in this office for decades. Emily sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Dorothy drew strength from that proximity, from the fact that her daughter was here, choosing to be here, choosing to help. Marcus returned to his desk and pulled out a thick accordion file. "I'm going to be straight with you about what we're dealing with here. Your case is complicated. The physical evidence against you was substantial, and 35 years is a long time. Witnesses die, memories fade, evidence gets lost or destroyed. That said, I've been working on this for 3 years now, and I've found some things that trouble me. Things that should have troubled the original investigators if they'd bothered to look." He spread photographs across the desk. Crime scene photos that made Dorothy's breath catch. She'd seen these before, during the trial, but they'd been abstract then, disconnected from reality by the surreal nature of the proceedings. Now, looking at them again, she felt the full horror of that night. Thomas on the kitchen floor, his eyes open and unseeing. Blood pooled beneath him, spattered across the cabinets. The knife, a knife from their own block, a knife she'd used to cut vegetables for dinner 1,000 times, lying beside his body. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, noticing her reaction. "I know this is difficult, but I need you to look at something specific." He pointed to one of the photos, a close-up of the back door. "This is the door you claim you entered through when you came home from work, correct?" Dorothy nodded, not trusting her voice. "The police report states there was no sign of forced entry. No jimmied lock, no broken window, nothing to indicate an intruder. But look here." He pulled out a magnifying glass and indicated a spot on the doorframe. "See these scratches? They're consistent with someone using a lockpick or a slim jim. Not obvious enough to notice at first glance, but they're there. I had a locksmith look at these photos, and he confirmed someone with the right tools could have opened this door without leaving obvious signs of break-in." Emily leaned forward. "You showed me this before, but I still don't understand. Why wouldn't the police have noticed?" "Because they weren't looking for it. They had you, Dorothy, with the murder weapon in your hand and the victim's blood all over you. Why would they waste time looking for signs of an intruder? The case was open and shut." Marcus pulled out another document. "But here's where it gets interesting. I pulled the 911 call from that night. Do you remember making that call, Dorothy?" "No." Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. "I remember screaming. I remember Emily appearing at the top of the stairs, but I don't remember calling 911. I don't remember anything clearly from those first few minutes." "That's because you didn't call 911. A neighbor did. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, who lived 2 houses down. She testified at your trial that she heard screaming around 11:30 that night and called the police. But I tracked down the actual 911 recording. He pressed play on a small digital recorder. The voice that emerged was elderly, shaky, but clear. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report something. I heard screaming from 247 Maple Street. A woman screaming. And before that, maybe 15 minutes before, I saw a man leaving the house. I didn't think much of it at the time, but with the screaming, I think something might be wrong. Can you describe the man you saw, ma'am? It was dark and I wasn't wearing my glasses. But he was tall, I think. Wearing dark clothes. He walked fast like he was in a hurry. He got into a car parked down the street and drove away. What kind of car? I don't know cars, honey. It was dark colored. That's all I can tell you. Marcus stopped the recording. Mrs. Briggs died 8 years ago, so I can't interview her. But this is crucial information that somehow never made it into the trial. The prosecution never mentioned a man leaving the house. The defense never brought it up either. Why? Dorothy felt like the floor was tilting beneath her. I don't understand. My lawyer never told me about this. Why wouldn't he tell me? Because either he never heard the full 911 tape or he deemed it irrelevant. The problem with court-appointed attorneys is they're overworked and underpaid. They do the bare minimum to mount a defense. And in your case, the bare minimum wasn't enough. Marcus pulled out more documents. I also tracked down some of your husband's associates from that time. Most of them are dead or in prison themselves. But I found one guy, Lenny Pacheco, who was willing to talk. He and Thomas used to drink together at a bar called Murphy's. You remember that place? Dorothy nodded. Thomas went there sometimes after work, before he lost his job. I didn't like it much. It was a rough crowd. But he said he needed to unwind. Murphy's was more than just a bar. It was a known hangout for bookies and loan sharks. Small-time stuff, but enough to get you in trouble if you weren't careful. Lenny told me that Thomas had started gambling about 6 months before he died. Mostly sports betting, but also poker games in the back room. And Thomas wasn't good at it. He was losing more than he was winning, and he started borrowing money to cover his debts. Emily made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. That's where the credit card withdrawals went. He was paying gambling debts. That's my theory. And here's the thing about loan sharks. They don't like it when people can't pay. They send enforcers to collect. Sometimes those enforcers get violent. Marcus pulled out a final photograph. This one a mugshot of a hard-faced man with cold eyes. This is Vincent Calabresi, known as Vinny the Hammer. He was the main enforcer for a loan shark named Paul Russo, who operated out of Murphy's. Vinny had a reputation for brutality. 3 people who owed money to Russo disappeared in the late 80s and early 90s. Their bodies were never found. Vinny was suspected but never charged. No evidence, no witnesses willing to talk. Dorothy stared at the photograph, trying to imagine this man in her kitchen killing Thomas. Is he still alive? No. Vinny died in 1998, stabbed in a bar fight. But Paul Russo is still around. He's 79 years old now, retired from the loan sharking business, living in a nursing home with dementia. I tried to interview him, but he barely knows his own name anymore. Dead end there. Marcus gathered up the photographs and documents. Here's what I think happened. Thomas owed money to Russo. Maybe $10,000, maybe more. The credit card withdrawals were partial payments, but they weren't enough. Russo sent Vinny to collect. Vinny came to your house that night while you were at work. Maybe he just meant to scare Thomas. Maybe things got out of hand. Either way, Thomas ended up dead, and Vinny disappeared into the night. He was seen leaving by Mrs. Briggs, but by the time the police arrived, you were there with the knife in your hand, and they didn't look any further. The theory made horrible sense. Dorothy could see it playing out in her mind. Thomas desperate and terrified. Vinny cold and methodical. The confrontation. The violence. And then she'd walked into the aftermath, picked up the knife in shock, and sealed her own fate. Can you prove any of this? Not definitively. Not enough for a court. Lenny Pacheco's testimony would help, but he's a convicted felon with credibility issues. The 911 tape is good, but the defense could argue the man Mrs. Briggs saw was unrelated. The scratches on the door are suggestive, but not conclusive, and the main suspect is dead. Marcus leaned back in his chair. But here's the thing. We don't necessarily need to prove who killed Thomas. We just need to prove that there's reasonable doubt about whether you did it. New evidence can be grounds for overturning a conviction, especially if that evidence suggests another viable suspect. How do we do that? Emily asked. What's the process? We file a motion for a new trial based on newly discovered evidence. I'll compile everything I've found into a comprehensive report. You'll need a good lawyer, not a public defender this time, someone with experience in wrongful conviction cases. They'll present the evidence to a judge, argue that justice was not served in the original trial. If the judge agrees, they could order a new trial or even dismiss the charges outright. How long does something like that take? Dorothy heard the hope in her own voice and hated how desperate it sounded. Months, maybe years. The legal system moves slowly, especially when it comes to admitting mistakes. And Dorothy, I need you to understand something. Marcus's expression was grave. Even with all this evidence, there's no guarantee. The prosecution will fight this. They'll argue that the new evidence isn't really new, that it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the trial, that you had a fair shake the first time. Some judges are sympathetic to wrongful conviction claims. Others are not. You need to be prepared for the possibility that this doesn't work. But it might work, Emily said fiercely. It might, and we have to try. Marcus nodded. Yes, we try. I've already contacted an attorney I know who specializes in this kind of case. Her name is Rachel Kim, and she's agreed to review the file. She's expensive, but she's good. One of the best. How expensive? Dorothy asked, though she already knew the answer would be more than she could possibly afford. Her retainer is $20,000. After that, it's $400 an hour. Marcus must have seen the devastation on Dorothy's face because he quickly added, but she sometimes takes cases pro bono if they interest her. And your case, a woman who served 35 years for a crime she likely didn't commit, that's exactly the kind of case that interests her. I'll pay whatever it costs, Emily said. I've been saving. I have some money set aside. And if it's not enough, I'll get a loan. We're doing this. Dorothy wanted to protest, wanted to tell Emily she couldn't accept that kind of sacrifice. But the words wouldn't come, because she wanted this too badly. Wanted her name cleared, wanted the truth acknowledged, wanted the world to know she hadn't murdered her husband. 35 years she'd been labeled a killer. 35 years she'd carried that weight. If there was even a chance of putting it down, she had to take it. There's something else you should know, Marcus said. I've been doing some digging into the original investigation, and I found something odd. The lead detective on your case was a man named Frank Morrison. He retired in 2005 and died in 2018. But before he died, he gave an interview to a journalist working on a book about unsolved cases. In that interview, Morrison mentioned your case. He said it always bothered him, said something about it never sat right. But when the journalist tried to follow up, Morrison refused to elaborate. He said some things were better left alone. What does that mean? Emily demanded. I don't know, but it suggests that Morrison knew something, or suspected something, that he never put in his official reports. Maybe he had doubts about your guilt. Maybe he knew about Vinnie Calabresi and chose not to pursue it. Maybe he was pressured to close the case quickly and didn't ask too many questions. We'll never know. He took whatever he knew to his grave. But it's another piece of the puzzle that suggests the investigation was incomplete at best, corrupt at worst. Dorothy felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce. If Morrison had doubts, why hadn't he spoken up? Why had he let her rot in prison while he went on with his life, collected his pension, retired in comfort? But the anger faded as quickly as it came. What good did it do to be angry at a dead man? It wouldn't give her back the years she'd lost. It wouldn't undo the damage, All she could do was move forward, try to salvage whatever time she had left. They spent another hour going over details, with Marcus walking them through every piece of evidence he'd collected, every lead he'd pursued, every dead end he'd hit. By the time they left his office, Dorothy's head was spinning with information. They stood on the sidewalk outside, the smell of Korean barbecue still heavy in the air, and Emily turned to her mother. "Are you okay? I know that was a lot to take in." Dorothy searched for the right word, "overwhelmed, but also hopeful, which is strange because I haven't let myself hope for anything in a very long time. Marcus is good at his job. If there's evidence to find, he'll find it. And Rachel Kim, I've looked her up online. She's won several wrongful conviction cases. She got a man released after 40 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. If anyone can help us, it's her." Us. Emily kept saying us, kept treating this as a shared endeavor. Dorothy still couldn't quite believe it. 3 days ago, she'd been alone in the world, certain her daughter hated her and would never forgive her. Now she had an ally, a partner, someone fighting beside her. It was almost too much to process. They walked to a nearby coffee shop, and Emily bought them both lattes, a beverage Dorothy had never tasted before prison, since such things hadn't existed in the world she remembered. The drink was sweet and strong and complicated, much like everything else in this new world. They sat at a small table by the window, and for a while neither of them spoke. Then Emily said, "I need to tell you something, about why I bought back the house." Dorothy waited, sensing this was important. "After you went to prison, I was placed in foster care. The state took me because I had no other family willing to take me in. I bounced around between homes for 6 years until I aged out of the system at 18. Some of the homes were okay. Some were terrible. But none of them were mine. I never felt safe. Never felt like I belonged anywhere." Emily stared into her coffee cup. "When I finally got out on my own, the first thing I wanted to do was go back to that house. Our house. I wanted to see it, to stand in those rooms again, to remember what it felt like to have a home. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was too afraid, too angry, too broken." "Emily, let me finish. I need to say this." Emily looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I spent 20 years running from that house, from that night, from everything that happened. I moved around constantly, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I had relationships that fell apart because I couldn't let anyone get close. I had jobs I quit because I didn't feel I deserved success. I was a mess, Mom. A complete mess. And then I met Sarah." Dorothy thought of Sarah. Warm, steady Sarah, who'd welcomed a stranger into her home without question. "She seems wonderful." She is. She's the most patient, understanding person I've ever met. And she made me realize I needed to stop running. I needed to face what happened and deal with it, or it was going to poison the rest of my life. So I started therapy. Real therapy, not just the grief counseling they made me do when I was a kid. And slowly, I started to understand that buying back the house wasn't about going backward. It was about reclaiming the narrative. About refusing to let that one terrible night define the rest of my life. "That's very brave," Dorothy said softly. "It didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. And then Lily was born. And suddenly it wasn't just about me anymore. I wanted her to have what I'd lost, a sense of history, of belonging. I wanted her to grow up in a house full of love, to overwrite the tragedy with something better. And it's worked mostly. She's happy there. She doesn't know what happened in that kitchen. Someday I'll tell her, when she's old enough. But for now, it's just home to her. You've done an incredible job with her. She's a beautiful child. She asks about you constantly. Wants to know when you're coming back. If you can come to her school play next month. If you like pizza because that's her favorite food, and she wants to share it with you." Emily smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I haven't told her about the prison. I haven't told her why you were away. I will eventually, but not yet. Right now, you're just Grandma Dorothy who lived far away and now you're back. Is that okay? It's more than okay. It's a gift. Dorothy reached across the table and took Emily's hand. Thank you for giving me a chance to know her, for giving me a chance to be part of your life again. I know I don't deserve it. Stop saying that. You served 35 years for something you didn't do. If anything, the world owes you, not the other way around. Emily squeezed Dorothy's hand. But there's something I need from you. I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't give up, even if the legal stuff takes years, even if we hit dead ends, even if it looks hopeless. Promise me you'll keep fighting, because I can't do this alone. I need you to believe it's possible, to believe we can win. Can you do that? Dorothy looked at her daughter, no longer the 12-year-old girl she remembered, but a grown woman with her own child, her own life, her own scars. Emily had survived so much, had built something meaningful from the wreckage of their shared tragedy, and now she was asking Dorothy to have faith, to believe in the possibility of redemption. It was a lot to ask. Faith had never been Dorothy's strong suit, and 35 years in prison had pretty much destroyed whatever capacity for hope she'd once possessed. But looking at Emily's face, seeing the determination there mixed with vulnerability, Dorothy found herself nodding. I promise. I'll fight. We'll fight together. They finished their coffee, and Emily drove Dorothy back to the halfway house. As they pulled up to the curb, Emily said, "Dinner tomorrow night? At the house? Lily's been practicing a song she wants to perform for you. She's very serious about it. I wouldn't miss it for anything." Dorothy got out of the car and watched Emily drive away, then turned and walked up the path to the halfway house. Inside, the common room was full of women in various states of transition. Some watching television, some talking in small groups, some sitting alone with expressions that Dorothy recognized. The lost look. The what now look. The look of people who'd been released from prison only to discover that freedom was its own kind of cage. Shirley was at her usual post behind the front desk. "Dorothy, you have mail. Came this afternoon." Mail? Dorothy couldn't imagine who would be writing to her. She took the envelope Shirley held out. Plain white, no return address, her name and the halfway house address written in neat block letters. She carried it upstairs to her room, sat on her bed, and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Stop asking questions about Thomas Miller. Stop stirring up the past. What happened 35 years ago is done. Leave it alone, or you'll regret it. This is your only warning. Dorothy's hands shook as she read the words again. Someone knew. Someone knew she was investigating Thomas's murder, and they were threatening her. But who? And why, after all these years, would anyone care? She thought about the 911 tape, about the man Mrs. Briggs had seen leaving the house. If that man was Vinnie Calabresi, he was dead. But what if he'd had a partner? What if someone else had been involved? Someone who was still alive? Someone who had something to lose if the truth came out? Dorothy folded the letter carefully and put it in her pocket. She should show it to Emily, to Marcus, maybe to the police. But a small voice in her head whispered that doing so might make things worse. Whoever sent this was watching her. They knew where she lived. They knew what she was doing. For the first time since walking out of prison, Dorothy felt truly afraid. Not the ambient fear of prison life, the constant vigilance required to survive. This was different. This was targeted. Someone wanted her to stop investigating, badly enough to threaten her. But she'd made a promise to Emily. She'd promised to fight, to not give up, and she meant to keep that promise, even if it put her in danger. Because after 35 years of having nothing, she finally had something worth fighting for. She had her daughter back. She had a granddaughter. She had a chance at clearing her name. And she wasn't going to let some anonymous threat take that away from her. Dorothy lay down on her bed, the letter still in her pocket, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would tell Emily about the threat. Tomorrow they would decide together what to do. But tonight, she would let herself feel the fear, acknowledge it, and then set it aside. She'd survived 35 years in prison. She could survive this too. Dorothy didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark listening to Ethel's soft snoring, the threatening letter burning like hot coal in her pocket. Every creak of the house made her jump. By the time gray dawn filtered through the curtains, she'd made her decision. She would tell Emily about the letter, but she wouldn't let it stop them. Her phone rang at breakfast. Emily's voice was urgent. "Mom, can you meet me at Marcus's office in an hour? Something's happened." When Dorothy arrived, Emily was already there with Marcus and a sharp-eyed woman in an expensive suit. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Rachel Kim. I'm taking your case pro bono." Before anyone could continue, Dorothy pulled out the threatening letter. The room went silent as they read it. Marcus examined the envelope. "Whoever sent this just made a mistake. They revealed they're scared." He pulled up files on his laptop. "I found something big. A man named Ray Martinez worked as bookkeeper for Paul Russo, the loan shark. 3 weeks after Thomas died, someone stole documents from Ray's apartment. He's 81 now, dying of cancer, and ready to talk. He confirmed Thomas owed Russo $15,000 and has records proving Vinnie Calabrese was sent to collect the night Thomas died." Dorothy felt tears streaming down her face. "We could actually prove it," Rachel nodded. "I'll file the motion in 2 weeks. But Dorothy, be careful. Whoever sent that letter is watching." The months that followed brought a new rhythm to Dorothy's life. She found work as a night janitor. During the day, she prepared with Rachel. In the evenings, she had dinner with Emily, Sarah, and Lily. She watched her granddaughter's school play, learned to cook new recipes, and slowly rebuilt what had been broken. 6 months later, Dorothy stood in court as Rachel presented their case. Ray Martinez testified about Thomas's debt. Marcus showed the 911 tape and the evidence. The prosecution fought back hard, but Judge Henshaw listened carefully. 30 days of waiting felt like 30 years. Then Rachel called. "The judge overturned your conviction. She ruled the evidence created reasonable doubt and your original trial was fundamentally unfair. Dorothy, you're free. Actually, legally innocent." That evening, Emily threw a celebration. Lily crowned Dorothy with a paper tiara, calling her Princess Grandma the bravest. As Dorothy sat surrounded by her family, she thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd found. "What are you thinking?" Emily asked. Dorothy looked at her daughter, at Sarah, at Lily sleeping on the couch. "I'm thinking I lost 35 years. But I got you back. I got this family. I got the truth. And that has to be enough." "It's not enough," Emily said, her voice breaking. "No," Dorothy agreed gently. "It's not. But it's what we have. And I choose gratitude over bitterness. Because we won, Emily. Against impossible odds, we won." Through the window, the oak tree she'd planted 47 years ago stood solid and enduring. Dorothy was free now. Free to watch it change with the seasons. Free to live whatever years remained with the people she loved. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the justice she deserved. But after 35 years of having nothing belong to her, this freedom was everything. Dorothy Miller had walked into her old house on New Year's Day expecting ghosts and found instead a family, redemption, and finally, after all these years, the truth.